Welcome to the Dodger Game channel. You are in the Mormon Truth video library contained therein. Mormon Truth videos are about bringing LDS history to light and perhaps a little American history and what's going on in the world. So it's Memorial Day weekend, it's Saturday, and I, about a day ago now, put out these videos dealing with secret combinations. So let's take a look here. They are done in two parts here, called Book of Mormon Warnings of Secret Combinations, Illuminated Freemasonry, the CFR, and Donald Trump Today. So in this video, right now, I want to go into a few things that relate to these videos and this topic, as well as the entire LDS apologetics business and the discussion of the verity of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints being the kingdom of God on earth, or representing it, and as a representation of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. Constantly a topic on the internet, and I'm trying to look very objectively, if that's possible, or honestly at least, at how both sides of this work. I want to involve some comments that are posted with the number one of this particular the Book of Mormon Warnings video. I've been having a good conversation with someone on the subject, and this is a subject that people who paid attention to church leaders such as J. Reuben Clark and Ezra Taft Benson are pretty much into. Not so much many people now as there used to be, and this is because, in my opinion, there's been a shift in the rhetoric that we hear from church leadership regarding secret combinations and where they are centered and their effect on the government of the United States. These two videos really deal with a subject that even I, in all my years of studying this sort of thing, was not aware of, and that it involves the intricacies and provability of corporate governance. A really interesting subject, and I used some material prepared by another gentleman. I used some portions of his presentation, and you can view even more of that on his channel. He did a fantastic job of unveiling something and proving it with comprehensive annual financial reports issued by what we consider government bodies, and happen actually to be, in reality and provably, privately owned corporations. And we're talking cities, states, counties, pension funds, etc. And he showed us how they proved actually to be international or transnational corporations operating in capacities that are unbelievable, and containing investments of maybe, far in excess of $100 trillion, enough to pay off the national debt to the international bankers running the Federal Reserve banking system, and have much left over. But however, they do not benefit the people whose money they have taken to create these enormous corporate conglomerates. So anyway, I've been having a good conversation, especially with someone who goes under the name of When Pigs Fly. Yeah, well, this guy is pretty informed, and we've had a good conversation. So I think that you'll find these things much more informative than you do a lot of Mark Dice, that's for sure. If you watched my video on what Mark Dice tried to, when he said the Book of Mormon is an Illuminati hoax or whatever, and then he did basically nothing to back it up. Mentioned a few issues of concern for Latter-day Saints with the Book of Mormon, but he basically didn't back up what his title used to just bring viewers. So anyway, I want to make a statement here that I've written. I want to read something. In other words, I usually just go off the cuff for most of what I have to say. And some of your other guys, like Flackerman, I think he reads he creates, I believe I saw in a comment where he said he was putting together his script, and he does just a super professional job of everything he does, and he sounds great, and I just go off the cuff normally. So I'm going to read something here, and I've got print big enough that I can probably do this without sounding as bad as I did last time I read something, because I've done something differently. All right, here we go. So I'm saying some people, or it would seem most members of the LDS Church, more or less, come from the view point where they have believed that the Old and New Testament are at least mostly true, and somehow justify the actions of Yahweh, blaming it on wickedness, and we're talking about, acts of destruction on people, blaming it on wickedness of the people, and somehow miss a few things, or just fail to think them out thoroughly as the actions of Yahweh, and how they relate to what the character and attributes of God are supposed to be. The LDS doctrine of the apostasy, engineered basically by the Catholic Church, is then presented as the reason for the need of a restoration of a true and living gospel. The scriptures, having been adulterated or altered by the great whore of Babylon, the great and abominable church of the devil, or in other words, the Catholic Church. Okay, so thus the stage is set for the need for a restoration. God, not wishing to put a new wine in old bottles, chooses a young lad, pure and good, Joseph Smith, a young fellow who wouldn't even use alcohol to dull the pain of a horrible operation when he was a child. This is what's presented to us, and in the Book of Mormon we're given basically a manifest destiny version of American history, with God inspiring Columbus and many people to come over to the Americas and basically bailing out the colonists against Great Britain and the monarchy in the Revolutionary War, and setting up a land, inspiring people to write a constitution that he gives his stamp of approval on in the Book of Doctrine and Covenants and a revelation or two, and allows a government to exist that promotes religious tolerance, freedom of religion, something Yahweh wasn't really into in the Old Testament, as we can see. He was busy having his people slaughter folks who believed something different. But in America, we've got some religious tolerance, and the gospel was able then to be restored. That's kind of what we're taught. So this is a part of Mormon theology. As part of this theology, however, we are told that God is righteous and unchanging. He is all-knowing and eternal, that he operates through revealing truth through certain representatives called holy prophets, and functions in his organization of his church through what is called the priesthood. What I'm saying is when we look at this, if Jesus Christ is guiding the church and he's a perfect being, then certain things need to be in harmony with that. Everything needs to be consistent with that in terms of his revelation and how his church is run. We realize that people are imperfect, but we have to take a look and see if every issue that seems to be contrary to that is actually attributed to human imperfection. So when we see that his commandments and his leaders are appearing to be not consistent with this, when we find discrepancies with the assertion that a perfect being, such as Jesus Christ, we are told is guiding the church through direct revelation, this is what causes issues in people's testimonies. When they see discrepancies, whether it's in the scriptures themselves contradicting each other, we have Jesus contradicting himself, or later prophets. If we have prophets contradicting former prophets, whether they're contradicting what was taught in General Conference or what has been canonized as scripture, there seems to be a conflict, an inconsistency, or other things of this nature, whether the God of the Old Testament seems to be changing his mind, his behavior, as an anthropomorphic being might. As society changes, is he adjusting in his doctrines? All these things, anything that looks inconsistent with this, what we're told, that we're guided by a perfect God in his church, in his perfect church, with his imperfect servants. Can everything be reconciled to that or not? People who don't think so were in the past called anti-Mormons, apostates, and now the church has introduced more recently, I think, the term critics. Maybe softened up a little bit on some of the language, on some of the rhetoric, possibly, to people who find that they can't exactly reconcile things that the brethren are saying now to what the brethren were saying 160 years ago, or to what is in the scriptures, or can't reconcile what appears to be God's word or history of God's dealings with God's character. So you've got people that are now maybe called critics, although they may be called anti-Mormons and apostates. All these labels tend to carry a negative connotation, putting them in the box of evil, with the brethren in the box of good. And in the church, we've had a very black and white definition of things. White is good, black is bad. Abel was good, Cain was bad. Seth was good, Tubal-Cain was bad. Light is good, darkness is wrong. The LDS Church is good. Luciferians, Satanists, occultists, and the Catholic Church are bad. In fact, according to the Book of Mormon, if you're not in the LDS Church, you're part of the Church of the Devil. It's stated right there. They say 2 churches only. And the others are all basically, the other Christian churches, I would say, are all appendages to the great and abominable Church of the Devil, which is pretty clearly identified as the Catholic Church. So we have people who have found issues that appear to be inconsistent with the church being true, with the Book of Mormon being true, with all the scriptures being true, with the brethren being holy prophets guided by the Hebrew God. The videos I did recently on these secret combinations are specifically involving issues related to protection of liberty, or that subject. The warnings found in the Book of Mormon, especially noted in Ether chapter 8, which were heavily talked about by Ezra, Taft, Benson, and probably J. Reuben Clark and others, when the church appeared to have a stance that it was involved in protecting or getting its members to do as Moroni warns in Ether chapter 8, not allow this secret combination to overrun the land, because its goals were to destroy the freedom of all lands, nations, and people. The change of the rhetoric that we receive from the brethren at the top is alarming to many people. And so in this video, in those 2 videos, I was addressing some of that and noticing where it appears this secret combination seems to have spread to. Noticing secret alliances between leaders of many religious groups and leaders in politics, business, and banking, and of course what we call the defense or industrial military complex. The corporate governance subject was pivotal. The alliances, the occult, and Freemasonry identifying people in satanic secret societies, their allegiance and their brotherhood was very important. Okay, so I think I'm going to read some comments here about those videos, or thoughts that, were at least based on conversation that came on commentary on one of those. So I'm going to go ahead and read some of those, some of the discussion between the person using the identity of When Pigs Fly and me using the identity of Dodger Gang. Now, if you haven't seen those 2, it might be useful, even previous to hearing this, because things are shown and demonstrated and proven that give credence to some of the discussion that is had on these comments. A lot of people who in the church have been aware of secret combinations had a viewpoint that appears to be limited to the manifest destiny point of view. And as we look deeper into the origins of secret combinations, secret societies, the secret society network, the occult, and the relationships that we find between governance in what we call political government and religion, or in other words, the illusion of church and state being separated in the United States, is in fact very much an illusion, as we more carefully examine how the Amalekites on the towers are the religious leaders who promote the wars that are profited by by the stockholders in the businesses that participate in furnishing the materials used by the military-industrial complex. In other words, war is very profitable for some. And this doesn't really go well with some points of view that are not aware of these things. I'm starting to read the initiation of our conversation here. Says Pigs Fly, I've been observing this type of behavior of Mormon leadership for many years. Thanks for compiling it. I'll be sharing for sure. It's strange so few notice. About 18 years ago, I began to notice the divergence of the contemporary hierarchy of the church, of the original church dogma. So I began to pay more attention. This caused me to reflect upon the events which occurred 30 years ago between the presidency and Mark Hoffman. I was living and working in Salt Lake City at the time, and I didn't fully realize the significance. Another fascination is the widespread cognitive dissonance among general members, which renders them incapable of criticizing the leadership. All these observations led me to the study of the occult. Okay. Anytime I notice an organization's dogma in opposition to its behavior, I suspect the occult. The U.S. government was similar with respect to the occult. A few years ago, I saw pictures of Mormon authorities exchanging super-secret handshakes with government officials. It is astonishing how easy it is to lose friends by just pointing this out. Exchanging the filter of devotion with the filter of skepticism exposes all kinds of occult techniques utilized by the general authorities. I'm not much interested in people's superficial reasons for leaving the church. Even they are somewhat ignorant to the depth of the corruption and the occult within the church and the church's role in government. For example, some become upset about polygamy generally, but I get curious about men like Hinckley minimizing its advent and usage and declaring any member caught indulging will be excommunicated. At the same time, other prophets declare the impossibility of achieving celestial glory if you don't participate in polygamy. Many people act as if the church were to remedy their one issue, they would get back in line. But the problems of the church run much deeper. I enjoy watching other people's breakdowns and expose of general authority speeches and behavior. I know how tedious it is, so I appreciate the effort. Just finished part 2 and enjoyed that as well. I hope this was responsive to your request. I will be happy to answer other questions if I'm able. Well, alrighty then. Thank you. Says me. Thanks. That's very interesting. Some definite similarities between our awakening. I'm sure you noticed the same greetings that I displayed are probably what you're mentioning between Gordon B. Hinckley and Dick Cheney, Thomas Monson and George Bush. Of course, that was much more recent. I noticed his War and Peace talk, which disturbed me greatly. But I had been disturbed long before that because of Masonry, because I became aware of what appeared to be a continuing relationship between Freemasonry and the church in a situation that I discovered in a Masonic temple when I found out that the local LDS ward used to meet in the Masonic temple, and there were other things that alerted me to that. Also, people are aware of the changes that occurred in 1990 in the endowment. Many are not aware that pretty much that was Gordon B. Hinckley appearing to follow suit with what occurred in the Scottish Rite in 1986. These are just a couple of instances in which you may notice a continuing relationship. The other thing, of course, is that Joseph Smith being a Freemason is, acknowledged by the church, but they don't bother to tell you that, things that Albert Pike would tell you regarding the true doctrine, the pure doctrine of Lucifer, which he says high-degree Freemasons need to understand, that they need to harness the seething energies of Lucifer. When you see the links between the occult and Freemasonry, that high-degree Freemasonry is the occult. Low-degree, maybe not nearly so much recognizable. They, like all such organizations, need a base of income constituents who are used to supply their donations to the organization, financial and labor, just as many organizations do, where things are different at the top than they are at the bottom. They all need a base, they all need a constituency, whether to derive financial gain from. But the brethren at the top, we see when we listen to people like Albert Pike and his book, the short name of which is called Morals and Dogma, or Manly P. Hall, another 33rd degree Freemason and occultist, proclaiming the doctrine being of Lucifer. That just doesn't seem to mesh too well when you associate Luciferianism in an organization that the prophet of God feels the need to join and employ its rights in what he says are revealed rights as part of the LDS endowment. Trying to reconcile that is very, very challenging. Consequently, we see Masonry's affiliation with the occult minimized, if ever spoken of, in the church. We are given, if anything, the rhetoric that it's just a club, a fraternal organization, not something we're interested in, anything to divert the members of the church from realizing the association between the occult, Luciferianism, Freemasonry, and Joseph Smith and many of the early brethren, such as Brigham Young and I think about 11 of the 12, including several who became presidents of the church. It just isn't something that seems to mesh any better than water and oil when we mix the occult with leadership of God's one true church. And then when we see that the leadership of other neo-Christian or Christian religions or religious groups is also by members of occult organizations, whether they are all Freemasons or not, many are, and then involved in Ordo Templo Orientis, Theosophy, various other secret societies, Luciferian and satanic organizations. It gets to be a situation where we see, okay, all these Freemason occultists seem to be leading churches, and leading churches that seem to be working together, even with churches that are non-Christian, or people would consider non-Christians. In other words, look at the links between, say, Jerry Falwell and Liberty University and, Reverend Moon, leader of the Moonies, who finances so much. Look at the Freemasons heading up Christian evangelism. Look at people like Billy Graham, Oral Roberts, Robert Schuller, Pat Robertson, and others, and see how many of these folks are high-level Freemasons, or what other societies and groups that they mingle with. What about, Benny Hinn? I have no idea what he's involved with, but I don't consider him righteous. Religion is big money, and these guys are big Amalekites on the towers who stand up for whatever the political leaders on the Republican side of the aisle say when it comes to declaring war. In the name of patriotism, especially on Memorial Day weekend, the leaders of these churches and their underlings promote patriotism in military fashion, pretending that we are defending our freedom as the United States undermines government after government all over the world. Especially have they done so in the Middle East and Latin America. Much of it has been covert through the CIA. Overtly, we are aware of actions, especially since the proclaimed war on terror. And as we have seen instead of the denunciation of wars or how they were conducted that we saw by Ezra Taft Benson, who announced that we had a secret combination taking control over the United States government and over the world, especially as he noted in his 1988 October General Conference talk. But we saw Gordon B. Hinckley saying that his loyalties lay in a different direction and that we should trust our leaders who had knowledge that the general public didn't have. He replaced the mistrust Ezra Taft Benson taught with absolute trust of the leaders of the military-industrial complex, men like G.W. Bush and Dick Cheney, Colin Powell, Rumsfeld, and others, including Elder Brent Scowcroft, General Brent Scowcroft, CFR member, trilateralist, and member of many other organizations, even showing on the internet, on a very respected website, as being a member of the Bohemian Club, and inviting these men, including Zygmunt Brzezinski, who died yesterday or today, to speak to BYU students. This is not something you would expect from Ezra Taft Benson. Has there been a change? Many people in the LDS Church who follow the secret combination warnings probably think it has actually been a shift. But examining the facts, perhaps some may feel that the John Birch Society was actually controlled opposition, using techniques that we see used on Fox News. Pretending one thing, giving us part of the truth, and putting a spin on it that kept us from knowing important information that would lead us to a different conclusion and different results. Instances of Freemasons were still associated with the church, saw things that were disturbing. Okay, as well as my assessment that the establishment of the American colonies and what may have been a staged revolutionary war and possible Illuminism involved in it, the negotiators of the Treaty of Versailles had British loyalty ties. In other words, some of them were lawyers who derived their authority, of course, from the temple there in London. So, yeah, the House of Inns. So anyway, lawyers are British royalty, essentially. It is a title. Esquire is a British title. And of course, before the British burned the Constitution in the War of 1812, the Constitution contained an amendment which stated that no titled person could, be in public service of government. That didn't reappear later, and we have a bunch of lawyers running the country now, who's obviously they're tied to the British royalty. Maybe that's not obvious. All right. So these guys set us up for subservience and a great financial burden in that treaty. If you read the Treaty of Versailles, it doesn't look like the colonists won, not in my opinion. Not with the money that the people got saddled with paying back to British banks. Yeah, loyalty ties, and of course Franklin and his Hellfire Club and Ordo Templi Orientis. And when I read Pike and Manly P. Hall talking about the pure Luciferian doctrine, harnessing the energies of Lucifer, etc., I realized that when Joseph Smith became a Mason and then 7 weeks later changed the endowment to place Freemasonry in the endowment, I couldn't really conceive how that was being revealed from God, as is claimed. And this course is supposed to be unchangeable in the endowment, of course. You can read on the internet many changes that have occurred in the endowment. And the adaptation of, the oath of vengeance and all those sort of things upon the United States after the killing of Joseph and Hiram. Okay. Alright. I'm just going to skip ahead here. I, of course, studied the conspiracies since the 70s and realized it was much deeper than the Council on Foreign Relations. I began to decide that America was more like a British colony when I noticed people were tenants on their own property deeds and realized no one owned their property, at least not the common people, and somebody was lying to us. So, ironically, the doctrine taught in 1 Nephi chapter 13 of Manifest Destiny, and other secret combination thoughts, starting in Moses chapter 5 and then Ether chapter 8 with Ezra, Taft, Benson and company and the John Birch Society marketing conservatism as a start. But when I saw deeper, I saw that they were just controlled opposition and lying to me about the origins of this combination and of what the origins of what we call a country. I noticed that we were human cattle. I had once revered Ezra and spent time with a friend of his. Alright, I don't think I'm going to read all this stuff, but so basically we talk about how the church has changed the church has changed its stance, has become politically correct more and more on certain issues. If God is speaking, is God changing his attitude here? Does God feel differently about race, about slavery, about the LGBT issue? He's not just sending down fire and roasting these people. We had Richard G. Scott saying something sounded kind of like an oxymoron, and when he and Henry B. Eyring went to the Vatican, the Church of the Devil, to participate in a world conference of religious leaders, and I heard Elder Richard G. Scott on the LDS broadcast business between World Report, between conference talks a couple of years ago, saying we need to encourage governments to pass laws protecting the LGBT rights or something while yet protecting families. It seemed like an oxymoron to me, but that's what he said. That's a lot different from endorsing burning people alive in Sodom and Gomorrah, or what's mentioned in Leviticus, where the Israelites are instructed to kill anyone who is gay. How is it the church can change on items? How is it that they can contradict fundamental LDS doctrine as it relates to our exercise of agency in the premortal existence being the qualifying round to place us in the best situation to be in the chosen race, as Israel proclaims it has been since Yahweh was written of in the Old Testament, God's chosen people, and those who are born into the house of Israel in the church being the chosen ones, the noble and great ones, the choice spirits, as they hear in patriarchal blessings, as opposed to those fence sitters who are out doing something else during the war in heaven. Some think they were playing basketball. We still have the same doctrine taught in patriarchal blessings. We just don't hear that you were born Chinese or African if you were less valiant. We don't hear that preached at General Conference anymore. We don't hear the things taught that went along with that same doctrine, which were taught by, especially by people like Mark E. Peterson or Bruce McConkie or Brigham Young. But it all goes together. It goes together with the doctrine of the premortal existence and us obtaining results from our exercise of free agency, just as the gospel of prosperity preaches now that those who keep the commandments of God best prosper most, as it speaks of in the Book of Mormon. There are many doctrines that don't seem to correlate with the assertion that a perfect and all-knowing and unchanging God guides the church, and especially when we see the changes in the fundamental doctrines of the church in order to accommodate political correctness or the economic growth of the church, as it appears to have been in 1978, when the revelation came just about 2 or 3 months before the São Paulo, Brazil temple opened, which would have not have been very economically feasible without allowing people of mixed race, including African descent, entering into the temple. The portrayals of the Holy Ghost revealing things to Spencer Kimball and the brethren being all agreed in humility has been contradicted by second-hand renditions of eyewitness accounts to me from people who knew people there. Our comments discuss the use of neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP, and various other arts of persuasion that people tend to notice, some people notice the brethren using. Now, why is it that they are using hypnotic language and subliminal programming techniques on people in general conference and in other church services? Why are these things employed? Why is it employed in music? Is Jesus really into using coercive persuasion techniques, also known as mind control, on the members of his church? How does that work with the doctrine of free agency or moral agency? Well, that's an interesting subject. It really is. How honest and straightforward have the leaders been in general conference? What techniques has Gordon B. Hinckley used in his war and peace talk to bring us from the point of the United States attacking and bombing innocent people in Baghdad and throughout Iraq and Afghanistan to believing that they are the Gadianton robbers and engineered the events at the Twin Towers? And of course, let's not mention Building 7 that came straight down like the others did without ever being hit by a plane. In the foregoing videos, we established definite reason to believe that there are ties between the leadership of the LDS Church and those in the military-industrial complex, and that they help promote illegal and immoral wars of mass murder and aggression, which are very profitable for the military-industrial complex. How can it be that God's true prophets could be ignorantly doing such a thing, assisting modern-day Gadiantons to murder and plunder, while calling the victims the Gadiantons themselves, and employing advanced techniques of persuasion known to those who have been trained well in them? Not generally what you would expect from a holy prophet from a holy God. And who owns the preferred shares of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? We examined corporate governance in publicly traded companies. We did not, however, get to see who owns the shares in privately held corporations. Who owns the shares of LDS Inc.? Who owns the shares of the corporation of the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? Who owns the preferred shares and the majority stock in Bonneville International, or many of the other corporations that are held underneath the church's umbrella? How about intellectual reserve? How about some of the banking concerns? How about the cattle industry and others? How about the media? Make sure you watch those two Secret Combination Book of Mormon videos that I just did, and explore some other issues in the channel. You're going to see a lot of documentation, and I don't think very many people know about corporate governance and the role it plays of essentially replacing our constitutional or representative government that we're led to believe that we have, just as we're led to believe that we're free and all sorts of things that are not exactly the truth. Thanks for liking and subscribing. I'll look forward to hearing your comments.